All right, so I'm here with Kevin Hussey, United Fire and Water, which is a disaster recovery company. They are also a DKI member, and I'm going to mispronounce this. It's a nationwide organization, Disaster Cleanup International. You explain there's some certain standards to get involved with that, so you have to be kind of the cream of the crop to get involved. And then it's a big network revolving education, business sharing, all that kind of stuff. So, Kevin, what we've dealt with lately is we've had a few inspections like in Tampa and Outer Banks in North Carolina that had storm damage, primarily water. And so we've had some inspections where people had said, make sure this was repaired, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so while we can make sure work was done, we got to thinking like, hey, is there something we look for that would make it a little bit more in depth? Can we bring something a little bit different, more education to it, right? And help the guys understand what was done, what should have been done at least, and then things that they can look for. So on the water piece, man, I'm going to kind of turn it over to you on like what you guys do. Feel free to talk about your company and then how you actually go about treating water. Yeah.
So, water damage typically, water, fire, and smoke all begins with the bulk removal of whatever item it is that we're dealing with.
Okay.
Water damage is water. The water that's on the floor needs to be extracted. Okay, we're going to remove that bulk item. Fire and smoke, you got to remove the particulate, the soot, anything that created that has a particulate to it.
Okay.
Those things got to be removed before really any restoration work can be considered, even to begin that process. For water damage specifically, once the water is extracted, we're going to evaporate the rest of it.
Okay.
Depending on the category of water, we may have to remove bulk items like drywall, like flooring, like cabinets.
What do you mean by category?
So categories of water, there's category 1 is fresh water that you could consume as a human. Category 2 is gray water. That might be like water that comes out of your washing machine or your bathtub when you're done taking a bath.
Okay.
Then there's black water, category 3, which is grossly unsanitary water. It would include raw sewage, rising water from a flood. Category 3 water could also be category 1 or category 2 water that sat long enough to be degraded to a lesser level of sanitary. And it also, category 1 and category 2 water, as it may be released from a supply line to an ice maker, so it's clean water. But once it hits the floor and you have a dog or some cats or, it gets into a wall cavity where there's some rodents, that fresh water is not fresh water anymore as soon as that happens.
Okay. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. Okay, so we're extracting the water in bulk, then we're evaporating the water, and then depending on our category, we're removing cabinets, flooring, things like that.
Drywall, typically, baseboard, flooring, those are the most common things that we see come out.
Okay.
Cabinets that are hardwood, if it's a category 1 loss and it hasn't sat for a tremendous amount of time, we don't have any delamination in the cabinets, those can be saved many times. But if it is a Cat 2, Cat 3 situation, we're going to strongly consider removing those things.
Mm-hmm.
But then you see cabinets that are built with the MDF or particle board.
Mm-hmm.
Once that stuff swells, there's no drying it back to a pre-loss condition. It's shot.
Okay.
And you'll see it with baseboard, and that's something that your inspectors, little things to look for. And I'll show you an example of this in our classroom where we have a little bit of swollen baseboard, where it's obvious that it got wet. It's dry now, but the damage is done.
Okay. No, absolutely. Okay. All right. And so we go into there, we're removing products. And then is there any like treating? Are there any chemicals that go into this? Like I'm assuming you have to decontaminate, right? Especially if you're talking about like a gray or a black.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming it's not just like a Hoover steamer kind of thing.
Well, the extraction unit that we use is basically, it's exactly what would be in a Stanley steamer truck, the big truck mounted extraction unit that has the capacity to clean as well.
Okay.
And we'll do that if it's a Cat 2, Cat 3, the floor needs to be cleaned. We'll use that machine to do that. We'll also use, either a scrubbing, wet wipe with a towel. We'll use HEPA-Vax to remove particulate. We'll sand studs on occasion if there's discoloring or if we've got embedded mold growth. There's a process called encapsulation where you can seal a stud. If it's something structural that you can't take out, but it's damaged to a certain extent, if there's discoloration or staining, we may encapsulate. It's basically painting, to a certain thickness, 2 millimeters with an antimicrobial base. It's typically a latex-based product.
Okay.
And then we'll use antimicrobial as well. And there's a number of different things. There's disinfectants, there's antimicrobials, there's biocides, there's a number of different things. We typically use a plant-based product.
Okay.
So no respirator. It's not harmful to the people that live there. They're animals, they're plants, any of that stuff, but it's still very effective. And it's a product that's it's created using the herb thyme. And so it smells good, but it's very effective in microbial issues that stem from water.
Okay. Okay. Interesting, man. All right. And then all right. So looking at tips on site. So I know one of the things you said was looking for like a swollen baseboard. I'm assuming a lot of baseboard is just MDF, and that's why you can see it.
So,
or is this something else?
Maybe not a lot of baseboard is MDF, but certain homes, I think like the DSLD, the DR Horton, I think that they use some of that. It's less expensive material, and it just doesn't do well with water. Laminate floors are the same. Vinyl holds up well to water, but once the water gets under the vinyl, that's a problem.
Okay.
But the laminate floors are a type of kind of MDF. It's a particle board with a finish on top, and once that gets wet, it swells, and you're not gonna dry that back to a pre-loss condition. It's shot.
Okay. So visual things, we're looking for cues like did somebody just paint over something that looks like it's clearly swollen? That would be an issue. I'm thinking back to in 2016 we had the floods in Baton Rouge. My parents' house flooded a little bit, and they got a few inches, I think. And when they went through, they took out 2 feet of drywall. So it didn't mess with the electrical, so it didn't reach the outlets, but they took out up to 2 feet of the drywall, mostly so they could replace it. But I mean, is that something that you don't have to remove all the drywall? You're not worried about all that. But then I was thinking back to like some of the stuff they did, like with the studs and stuff like that. They did put some treatment on there. I don't remember what it was though. I don't remember any encapsulation, but I don't remember any being load-bearing walls either. So when we're covering that back up, I'm thinking about it now, you would have no idea. But I mean, cutting up like 2 feet or something like that, is that acceptable in this realm? Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
You could do a flood cut that's as little as 3 or 4 inches.
Really?
Yeah. We typically are going to do a foot to 2 feet. And a foot doesn't make as much sense as 2 because then you just rip a piece of drywall down the middle and you got your 2 feet, right? I think it's more efficient. You may spend a little more materials, but cutting those 4 pieces, if you went to a foot, that's going to be a pain.
I think that's exactly why they did that, because it did go in nicely. You could put it back in.
And cutting it at 2 foot also leaves you a factory edge on either side, which is important, and being able to tape and blend, to hide the flood cut essentially.
Okay.
So that's very typical of Cat 2, Cat 3 losses where the drywall got wet. It needs to come out.
Okay. All right. Anything else that comes to mind on water that we should look for?
Hardwood floors.
Okay.
So this would be engineered floor or natural hardwood floors. Discoloration. I walked into a lady's house, those cabinets that I showed you out there. Nobody really had any idea what was going on. I walked into her house and we had to walk past the kitchen, which had an island, to get to the outside of the house where this issue was happening. It was a PEX pipe that had a staple in it. It had been leaking for a long time. Okay. Well, I noticed on her wood floor there was discoloration, and I knew immediately. I was like, there's water damage here. I don't know to what extent, but there was just this little sign that I knew because of my experience. There's a problem here.
Okay. So, I mean, it could be small little thing. It could be tiny. Okay. Because I'm trying to think, like, usually whenever in my world, it's like drywall, right? That's usually where you'll see something and like you'll see a little bit of a stain, maybe somebody painted over kind of thing. Okay. So hardwood floors, engineers look for discoloration around where the area was.
Engineered or natural hardwood flooring. It'll be the wood will be darker if water is present.
Okay.
And that may be a slab leak. It may be something else that's going on. On laminate flooring, if you see swelling around the edges of those boards, the laminate boards, that's typically an indication that there's been some sort of moisture problem. Vinyl doesn't really show anything. It's impervious. It does real well with water, except for the fact that once water gets underneath it, what's vinyl? It's a vapor barrier. It's not coming out.
Okay.
So if it's fresh water, it may not make that big of a difference. But if it's Cat 2 or Cat 3 water, we're going to want to typically take that vinyl up and make sure that it's clean and dry.
Yeah, and then you probably have to replace the subfloor, I would assume.
well, it's mostly slab here.
Oh, I guess it's true. Yeah. Sorry, I'm on crawl space now. I don't
Yeah,
live in the
yeah.
South Louisiana world anymore. My head just goes there.
We don't do a lot of subfloor, but that you could certainly make an argument that the subfloor would need to be, at the very least, cleaned, sanitized, dried out. But if it's delaminated at all, yeah, it would need to be removed and replaced.
Okay. All right. And then you said you had some tools, right? That was just some water meters, or you said a couple different penetrating, non-penetrating.
Yeah, this is called a protimeter.
Okay.
This is made by GE, and it's a brand new meter.
And this one's a non-penetrating?
This is a penetrating and non-penetrating.
Okay.
And this is also what they call a hygrometer. So this will measure the moisture content in any material. This is non-penetrating here. Hey, look, I'm wet. My desk has a moisture content of 131. It's bouncing around a little bit. So we can measure moisture content at the, down low on drywall or flooring material. We also can use our pin moisture meter, and that tells me that there's moisture in my hand, 30 points. This is the more accurate way of measuring moisture.
Right.
And as we talked about earlier with the 3.5-inch stainless steel screws, we can set those in a sill plate or a hardwood floor even, and we'll do that a lot. If we have water damage hardwood floor, we'll set these screws down into the floor, through the subfloor if there is a subfloor, not a slab, and we'll hook up these alligator clips to both the screw and then the pins on the meter, which are there, and that's going to give me the moisture content on whatever material we're testing.
So you're able to penetrate deeper, because you were saying that the base piece, I forget what you called it, but the base piece is the one that takes the longest to dry.
The sill plate typically is going to be one of the more difficult things to dry in any property. Yeah. And every property has them, though some of them have metal sill plates. Most commercial structure has metal framing. Okay. So that would be, an exclusion to what we're talking about here.
Okay. Okay, so theoretically, if everything went well, they would have tested this. It would have been below, what did you say, it was 14 or 16 is what you're shooting for?
Yeah, mid-teens is typically what we're looking for. The best way to determine what you're looking for is to go to an unaffected area in that building, if there is an unaffected area, measure the moisture content in that area, and then you have your baseline. You have your standard.
Okay. All right. Perfect, man. That's pretty helpful knowing that. Okay, anything else on water you want to discuss at the moment? Or anything else we need to know, really?
I mean, we could talk about it forever. There could be a lot of different things to talk about, but off the top of my head, as far as what you're looking for, I don't really have anything. If your guys have meters, even a cheap meter, that you could pick up a meter. We give out meters to plumbers that cost $25-$30. Okay. And they have that penetrating option. And then all your guy needs is a screw gun to set those screws, and they need to be stainless steel uncoated. If they're coated, that's a problem. And the reason we use 3.5-inch screws is because a wall assembly, the sill plate itself is 3.5 inches wide. Okay. That's a 2x4. It's really 1.5 by 3.5, right? So it's 3.5 inches wide. Then there's a layer of drywall. Then there's a layer of baseboard. That's another inch. So we've got 5.5 inches of thickness. So if I got to go through the baseboard, the drywall, and then into the stud, I need that much screw to get to the center of the stud. This will work with a lower cost meter. Okay. So if your guys have a $30 meter and a drill gun and a box of these stainless steel screws, which are about $80 a box for a big box.
$80.
Oh. Yeah. But it's work. I mean,
probably just poke some prongs and some drywall right there.
And in that they have something called a hammer probe, which you can do, but it's not as efficient. You got to hammer every single time. These we set and we leave for the duration of the project. Okay. So there's another benefit there. So if I send out Lewis to go monitor a job today or start a job today, I can send Ben tomorrow, and he sees exactly where Lewis took his moisture content readings at. Okay. Yeah. So
you're not taking them in different spots.
It's consistency. Yes.
Okay. Well, good, man. So then some of the the fewer things that we deal with are like smoke and fire related. So I was kind of curious just to see what you did. Fire would probably be the most prominent, and then smoke beyond that. We do see some where they had fire claims. There was one on the Outer Banks of North Carolina years ago that this one company owned a bunch in a row, and the fire just jumped from house to house, and they lost like 6 in a row.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyway, on the fire side, what's going on the treatment space?
So fire is obviously it's a little more complex.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have water,
Okay.
you're going to have smoke, and then you're going to have fire damage materials as well. You may get into mold because the fire is typically going to sit wet for a long period of time.
Okay.
You're going to have contents to deal with that are smoke damaged, and that plays a role in the structural piece.
Okay.
It's those jobs they can be very complex. There's typically if it's more fire than smoke, there's typically going to be a lot of demolition.
Mm-hmm.
Materials that are charred beyond repair have to come out.
Okay.
And that could be stuff that's just aesthetics, like drywall, baseboard, flooring. But then you get into some structural members as well. You got joists, rafters in the attic space that a lot of times will be, we say, alligatored, so
Mm-hmm.
burnt beyond repair. They've lost their structural integrity.
Okay.
And they need to be replaced. You get into the sheathing on the roof. If the fire got in the attic, a lot of times that's going to have to be removed and replaced, which means more times than not, it's going to be full roof replacement.
Okay.
Depending on the age of the roof. If it's a newer roof, you may be able to match shingles and that sort of thing. But the fire is much more involved than water.
Okay.
Sure.
And it sounds like the fire is turning into mostly removal, whereas the water you can actually kind of remediate a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the extent of the fire. The greater the fire damage, the more demo and removal there's going to be. Mm-hmm. But if you got a little small fire on a stove at home that creates a bunch of smoke, mm-hmm. there's really not much removal at all. Okay. As far as structural stuff goes, we may have to remove insulation, carpet, drapery, things that are upholstered, things mm-hmm. that are porous that absorb smoke.
The couch cushion example.
Yeah, because it's you have the potential to have odor issues in the future if you don't remove those things.
So what? Okay, so I guess that just kind of segues into that smoke piece. So if we go into the smoke, we're doing some removal with that. You can do some remediation on some things, like we talked about with some clothes and things like that. But is there anything like we need to look for on that, or is there anything like is there like a distinct smell, like this had smoke damage at some point and like this has been remediated with some specific chemical? Are we just painting over stuff? Is it removal?
I mean, it depends on the extent of the smoke damage. And the heat really plays a role too. I mean, you could have just smoke damage where you don't have to do a lot of demo, but if you see the screws are starting to pop on the drywall, mm-hmm. that's an indication that it got so hot in there that you might want to consider removing the drywall. And there are people out there for even the slightest amount of smoke damage that could come in and sample and see if there's uncombusted particulate on any surfaces and any property. And we do this when we get these jobs, especially the ones that are smaller. So like mm-hmm. For instance, we had a smoke damage job. It was on the 4th of July. Fireworks went off in the garage, and I believe the big garage door was closed, and smoke got into the house to some kind of limited mm-hmm. Amount of smoke got in the house. Well, we didn't really know where to start or stop cleaning the structure and all of the contents. So we brought in it's a CIH is a certified industrial hygienist, or an IEP is an indoor environmental professional. All CIHs should have the capacity to come in and sample for uncombusted particulate.
Okay.
Or soot, the smoke residue. And we found in this particular case, this whole house it didn't look like anything happened, but there was uncombusted particulate throughout the entire house.
Ooh. Okay.
So in order to be able to guarantee that we were going to have a odor-free mm-hmm. subject at the end of this project, we told the carrier and the client, we have to clean the whole house and all of the contents and all of the ductwork, the entire HVAC system. Okay. I mean, you think about the smoke gets into a return, it gets distributed throughout the house via the supply vents in each room. As light as this was, it was still there.
It was transferring through. Okay.
Yeah.
And so whenever you're going through and you're talking about cleaning, is this another like plant-based kind of product kind of thing, or is this something heavy industrial?
No, depending on the extent of the smoke damage, we'll use We may use a wet application first to remove the bulk of what's there. We may HEPA-vac first to remove the bulk of what's there. We may use a dry cleaning process using something called a chem sponge, a chemical sponge.
Okay.
I've got one in the warehouse. I'll hand you one of those when we're done here.
Okay.
So yeah, the cleaning process it's going to vary from project to project. It's going to depend on what kind of fire it is. If it's a grease fire, everything's sticky. If it's an electrical fire, not so much. So each job is going to have its own specifics.
Okay. All right. So how you're kind of approaching it. All right. So at the end of the day, though, whenever something's been remediated, should I be walking into this house and smelling nothing? It should be good to go. Okay. So then again, we'd be back in the same boat of not really knowing. So
yes,
realistically, we're going to have some tips and tricks that we can look for on water. When it comes to the smoke, we're looking for really just basically screw pops just to see how hot it got. And then with fire, most of the time, it seems like it's going to be a lot of removal. So all of that would have been theoretically covered again by drywall.
Yeah. And on the tail end, when a contractor says the cleaning is done, the demo is done, you can bring back in your CIH or your IEP and have them test again. If you want to be certain all the particulates out of here. He's going to sample in a few places, not going to sample every square inch of the house, but it's going to give you some general idea of what the contractor did was complete or not.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. No, that's really helpful, man.
We do the same thing with mold as well, where a lot of times we'll have somebody come in and test up front, but then certainly when we're done with our work, we want him to come in and clear our work to make sure that what we did was complete.
Okay, because I remember when we talked in the Goldman Sachs program, you walked me through that mold stuff, and you were putting up vapor barriers. You had like walls in place. You had to close. You had like a closed loop air system or something.
It's an air scrubber that basically creates negative air, and we'll use those in fire and smoke as well.
Okay.
You can set up an air scrubber, duct it outside of the building. That means that any air that leaves that space that we're working in is going outside of the building, and it's not going to cross-contaminate another room.
Okay. All right, perfect. And then so mold though we see every now and then, especially in some commercial applications, especially with basements and things like that. So if you've done a mold remediation job, is there any signs that it was like crap, terribly done kind of thing? I mean, is there anything we can look for that might be like somebody did a subpar job with it, other than clearly seeing mold?
Obviously, if you see mold, they didn't do their job.
Yeah, exactly.
You can look for there's surface growth and then there's embedded growth. So surface growth is usually pretty easy to clean. You HEPA-vac it, you wet wipe it. Embedded growth is a little more difficult to deal with and requires removal for mold.
Okay.
That may be something that you look for. I would look for materials that should have been removed that weren't, like the swollen MDF, the swollen baseboard, that sort of thing, swollen cabinetry.
Okay.
Water staining in drywall, cabinet bottoms, things like that.
And so if we go, so we see some of the things. We see like the baseboards. Maybe you got bubbles in the baseboards. You got discoloration in the wood. You've got swelling around the edges of like a laminate. That kind of triggers you. There was some water damage here. You don't really know what extent. And you start walking around and you see like kind of maybe crappily patched jobs. Is there something where people will cut out like a specific section? Like, I mean, if you've got mold in a spot yay big, right? Can they cut out around that, or are we like replacing a whole sheet?
You usually go 2 feet beyond the damaged area.
2 feet. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
So that could be up, down, left, right.
Yeah.
You want to go 2 feet beyond is kind of the rule of thumb.
Okay. And then it's just up to whether or not the drywall guy was good at floating or not. That's really what it comes to. And so if they weren't good at floating, then you'll be able to see.
Yeah.
Be able to see it. You'll have an idea. Okay. But you would know it was repaired to some extent, and you would know the size that it was repaired roughly. Okay. Anything else off the top of my head I need to know here?
No, not off the top of my head.
Okay. Good, man. So we just summed your entire career up into one page of notes here. No, that's good. All right, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah.